Welcome to Certain Point of View's Another Pass podcast. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. Just go to certainpov.com.
Thanks, folks, for tuning in to Another Pass podcast. I'm Case Aiken, and today we're talking about Return of the Jedi. Now, with me is
Ben Milton
and
Addy Thomas. Thank you guys for joining us. This is sort of a little bit of a spinoff of our Certain Point of View podcast. We had, Case, you introduced a great idea to us of how to, reviewing the Star Wars prequels and kind of pitching what we would do to change it. And actually tell us how that idea started.
Well, it just started off as a game that I'd play with friends of mine while we were working in theater stuff. We'd be doing physical labor like hanging lights and stuff, and just free to talk about our shared nerd pursuits. So shout out to Jeff Moonen, who was my partner in crime in all of this, and we would brainstorm how we'd do movies better, or how we'd take movies that were great and make them even more amazing. And in this case, we're going to talk about Return of the Jedi, which is a movie that we all agree is good. It's part of the original Star Wars trilogy. It's a good movie. When I was a kid, I loved it more than Empire. It's a good movie, but it is not great. Right. It is not the best of the originals. It has some glaring flaws. It's
arguably the weakest of the originals.
Yeah, some people would argue that that's where you could start to see the Lucas problems creeping in. I don't know if I'd go that far, but there's definitely a few things where you can feel it's a different type of movie than the first two. Like the first one is this wonderful hero's journey, and the second movie is this cool, dark twisting of that parable. The third one does a really good job of being here's the closure we wanted, but it stumbles at a few spots. So I've got some thoughts on where it stumbles and what we could do to make it better. What about you guys?
Well, I think that's the great thing about this is we had so much fun doing this on Certain Point of View that we were able to spin it off into a whole completely different show, because you could do this with every movie, and that's what I love about this idea. And I'm so glad you're running with it, Case, because you're perfect to do this show, and I'm glad you're hosting it.
All right, thank you.
I think that with Return of the Jedi, there's a lot of problems that I have with this film overall, now that I'm an adult. Like you, when I was a kid, I think I really liked this film. It wasn't my favorite. I've always been a huge fan of Empire Strikes Back. That's always been my number one film. Star Wars right behind it, because it was the very first movie I ever saw in a movie theater with my mom, and I was a little kid, and it was just overwhelming and beautiful, and I was in a balcony seat front row. You couldn't ask for a better introduction to Star Wars.
That's amazing. You're also really old.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Dick. But with Jedi, I was perfectly. It was also in a highlighted time for me where I was really into action figures and G.I. Joe, and so I was really into the commercialism, and Jedi does a great job of cashing in on that.
Oh yeah, it feels like so 80s in certain regards. G.I. Joe's a great example. It's that 80s action movie kind of hero's victory. I think that's the reason I dug it more when I was young, where it is the closure. It's the winning thing. He defeats Vader. He defeats Palpatine.
Emperor.
Luke is such a cool hero. And there's battles with nature monsters and these walking robot things, which we got more of it than we did in Empire. That's there's a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of things to really latch onto, and that's really cool. But it's just not narratively as strong.
Narratively, it's a lot weaker.
Yeah, and I was sort of the same. My experience for the longest time, Return of the Jedi was my favorite Star Wars movie, and I think a lot of that's because I felt like the payoff was good enough,
And you love the Ewoks.
I do. I love Ewoks.
God damn it, Addy.
I still love Ewoks. I'm sorry.
I don't hate Ewoks. Yeah. We'll talk about them later. You want to hear something kind of funny, though, about the Jedi versus Empire thing? So when the video games were coming out, and this was, well after the movies had come out. So this was the Super Nintendo series of Star Wars games. And the first one was really good. They were pretty good games. You run around with a lightsaber. It's hard to make that bad. Well, I guess that's not true. They've been some pretty bad shit.
They've done it.
But on a 2D playing field, for
its time, it was pretty impressive.
So I remember seeing the ad in GamePro when they announced the Return of the Jedi, or Super Return of the Jedi for Super Nintendo. And the ad was, the first time you won. The second time they won. Now it all comes on to this. And that was the first time where I realized, oh my God, the Empire did win in Empire Strikes Back. Like in my like child head, because like I was like 7, like just was like, oh, all media heroes win every time. And like for whatever reason, I was just like, well, you know, they got away and everything's fine. Like, yeah, sure, Han got captured, but like, you know, that's a win regardless.
Right.
And I'm like, how did I ever think that? Like,
Your whole world just collapsed around
yeah,
you.
like, I was like, oh my god, my brain's exploding, and this is all thanks to the ad for the video game adaptation on Super Nintendo of Return of the Jedi.
And I think that's probably like what's warped me as a person is like my pure glee that the Empire won in that movie.
Yeah, see, I still don't feel that way. I don't have glee
love
that
that.
the Empire
I love that.
I love that they can make a movie like that.
that's
That's the
bold
thing
enough
that's
That
really
was
cool.
do
so ballsy
Yeah.
for its
Yeah.
time.
Absolutely.
And that actually is one of my notes when we get into like the nitty gritty. But I think we touched on one of the problems that I think people usually touch on, which is Ewoks. Like there's some roughness there. And the other one I think is the Death Star. People reference how it's like, oh, they made another Death Star, to the point where like it has now tainted the franchise that when they made The Force Awakens, they had to do another Death Star.
Right.
Like sure, Star Killer base, but it's another Death
Yeah,
Star. Like
it
they had to do a
really is.
trench run, they had to do all of that. Like the fact that the like broader story idea that Lucas had was like climax is a Death Star and they have like animals on the planet, or however true that story he told is. It feels weird that they didn't modify it when we got to the actual final chapter. Like that we shot our load on the Death Star in the first one and we got Chewbacca floating around in space already. So what are we going to do? We'll cut them in half and call them Ewoks, and we'll have a Death Star that's like not quite finished. Okay, cool. Moving on. Like both of those are my two big problems. And what are your thoughts on both of those?
I think, yeah.
Let's start with Ewoks.
Oh, start with Ewoks? Yeah.
Yeah.
No goddamn Ewoks. Just none. Totally unneeded. It's an unneeded plot device that doesn't help tell the story at all. In fact, all it does is diminish the story overall. And I know you're already rolling your eyes at it, but think about this: like they fought their way out of the Death Star, like in the first movie, you know, and they're like running from the stormtroopers, and like there's real peril involved in that.
yeah.
Now, fast forward to Return of the Jedi, and the stormtroopers are taken down by a bunch of fucking teddy bears.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. That completely that diminishes the terror and the fear and the need to be scared of stormtroopers.
But
it diminishes them. I think there's no way around that. I'm
Well-
sorry. There's nothing you're going to say that's even going to come close to making.
Well,
any
first
sense.
off, you've actually admitted defeat at one point in this argument because you tried. You've showed me images of Ewoks being terrorizing, and fear.
Yeah,
fearsome.
but that's not what we got in the fucking movie.
Hold on,
though.
let's unpack this for a second, because there's two things you were looking at. One is the actual Ewok that we got, like the little teddy bear creature, and the other is what the role they played in the story. And I feel that those are two separate things. I think the teddy bear part of it is probably there so they could sell it to kids and they
the
could
teddy
do a
bear
spin-off
there-
cartoon
yeah.
and other movies. And
The teddy bear part, absolutely commercialism. But I think the role they played is, and I understand, yes, Wookiee planet, absolutely, that would have been cool.
well, because here's the thing. We saw the extreme version of this in the Phantom Menace then when they go to the Gungans. Like,
Right.
that's where it, like, clearly it's just a giant misstep. Like, where it's like, okay, we found the natives and they're going to be our distraction and, like, our allies in this whole thing. And it shows us uniting as people together. And that's the Lucas ideal. Like, that's kind of a cool thing. And
Well, and it's also the idea. I think it's a bigger idea than that. And yes, you could have accomplished this with Wookiees if they were willing to spend the money on that. But for me, the Ewoks are charming. Whatever. Yes, it's a kid thing. It works for me. But the whole idea of them not being able to take down the Empire, the whole point of that is that the Empire is cocky and wasn't prepared for a battle like that. That they
That's
weren't, that they had
ridiculous.
but they had discounted the native peoples there because because there was nothing galvanizing them against the Empire until the Rebel Alliance.
But the
brings it
problem
together.
with the problem with that idea though is that the Empire was expecting problems there.
Not from the Ewoks, though.
They set the whole trap. Like
They set the traps for the rebels, but not for the Ewoks.
What that is such a horrible argument. Like
That is exactly the story.
we're prepared for guys with laser guns and giant Wookiees with bowcasters, but
A Wookiee.
but definitely not prepared for a 3.5-foot midget bear with a bow and arrow.
They weren't prepared for Red Squadron in the original.
Yes, but this time they
And it
are
was
prepared.
against
They
odds.
laid a trap. They laid the whole idea
Okay.
of this Death Star is that they're laying.
I think we need to refer people to the Ewok episode of Certain Point of View. It's one of the first few episodes because I don't want to get bogged down in an Ewok debate.
This is true. We don't need to retread it too much. Here's the thing: the Ewoks do have like shades of Vietnam. It's the same way Aliens had this element of like highly trained military people showing up, native population or sort of savage population, taking them out because they don't expect it. There is this element of American culture from the 80s where it's like lone people in the woods. Like this is a time where a lot of videos were being put out about like swamp fox during the American Revolution.
Right.
There's a lot of conversation.
Red Dawn.
Well, Lucas was wrote one of the original scripts helped write one of the original scripts for Apocalypse Now, and it was told from the point of view of the Viet Cong. So this is sort of like his retconning of the Viet Cong story into...
It's taking cultural elements and pulling it in. Like, here's my thoughts with the Ewoks to make it a little more palatable, because I think the way they're introduced is... they're too soft, except for, like, the detail that they're cannibals. Like...
Well, not cannibals. They eat humans.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, they're flesh-eating monsters.
It's a fine line, my friend.
Well, they're not eating themselves.
Because
There's
kind
a-
of what
every
they're-
cannibal is.
That we know of.
Kind of the joke what they're doing is similar to what happens in Galaxy Quest when they have like the aliens that look like children, except for these guys are still supposed to be our friends. So what's going on there? Like they look like teddy bears that aren't monsters but are monsters. Yeah. I don't know about that. Maybe if they like looked a little more competent to begin with, like they still like, because we'd still
And they didn't play
underestimate
them for
them.
laughs.
Yeah, like they're too cute. Like we would still underestimate them because they're savages and they could still be smaller than humans and only have sticks. But combined with maybe the moon had a few more than just like a small squadron. Like maybe there was a guerrilla war going on before the final battle gets into play. Like where there's
And the rebels show up and kind of bolster their forces.
well maybe maybe there were rebels already there.
Oh, yeah. See, and that's how I would rewrite it. I would rewrite it with, they know that they've got to blow up this shield to get to the Emperor, to stop him. So I would send Luke, Chewie, and Leia down in a small squad to fight the shield, to take down the shield. And you just need the rebels. Like the rebels are like if you frame the fight as sort of like a last-ditch, desperate effort to kill Palpatine and end the war. Like you already have overwhelming odds against a small force of just trying to keep it together group of people. I don't think you need to have an indigenous, quote unquote, primitive people to tell that story. You think it muddies the water? I don't think it muddies the water. I just don't think it's necessary. I think that you can tell that story without having to do that, and just make it a lot smoother, because now you're staying with your main heroes. You're staying with the idea of what's happening in that action with them instead of following Wicket, around the forest. I think that just makes a better, more compelling story for your heroes.
See, I feel that having them there, though, is still part of this theme. That, like, if you get, like what Addy was saying, like, if you get cocky, that's how you fall. Otherwise, the rebels would have no chance against the Empire, because the Empire, in terms of actual abilities, is clearly going to win.
Yeah, but see, that's completely discounted, though, by the Ewoks. Like, because they're so primitive, they shouldn't have a chance. Like, they literally have no
what I'm
chance
saying is
against a trained army.
their presence.
We've seen that in history happen, though. Like what?
Not to that
hold on.
degree.
What we're talking about is the portrayal of the Ewoks versus the role the Ewoks are meant to play. If the Ewoks were a little more effective and had a few more things going on for them and were more bolstered by rebel forces, maybe that would make it
more believable.
Yeah, more believable. Like if they were showing the rebels where things were that were advantages, and rebels were combining their technology and ingenuity with the Ewoks' knowledge of the land and terrain, and
instead of the
and
Ewoks
resources.
just sweeping in.
Yeah, exactly. The Ewoks are a force unto themselves in this, and as a result, it's unbelievable because oh man, they just took out an ATST. Like, how did that happen? That doesn't make any sense.
They happen to have logs swung up.
Well,
into the
exactly.
trees.
Those are crazy. But if the Ewoks knew more about the terrain and that there were were like, say, certain mosses that could catch on fire and that could be used for some sort of explosive, or or that there were things that had tensile strength.
But the problem with that idea though is that you end up getting like a half-hour explanation about who the Ewoks are. Like,
no, you don't have to do that. You just show a brief moment of an Ewok, like, helping a rebel soldier, like, grab this moss, setting it on fire.
Yeah,
awesome.
or the way that their cities are suspended in the trees are based on like a type of vine that's just really, really strong. Like it only requires like one or two details that they use.
It's just like show
like
don't tell.
I'm not saying like I'm throwing out a lot of ideas. Like maybe they knew about underground tunnels, but like they don't have to use all of them. I'm just saying like take one or two, figure out how to have them make sense for the story. Like maybe the Ewoks actually go underneath and into the base while the rebels are like doing the distraction.
Iwo Jima style underground tunnel network.
So everyone's trying to fool everyone. Like those could all be kind of cool things. So basically, I think I'm in favor of the role of the Ewoks in this movie. I just think the execution is the beta test for ultimately the Gungans. And that's the problem.
Troubling.
Yeah. Like that, I think the Ewoks is one of the areas where you can feel like the type of fan servicey, marketing driven stuff that will later dominate the prequels.
Yeah, for sure. I don't think they're necessary. I think that.
But you're also a clear fan of the Empire too. Let's just make that clear.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think the Empire is incredible. Without the Empire, you don't have a really compelling story.
Yeah, I agree. The stakes have to be high, otherwise it doesn't matter. Like that's one of the problems with like the Phantom Menace. Like they don't do a good job explaining the stakes for why this battle is so important. Like for why anything has to happen the way it does. Like the fact that it comes down to Darth Maul versus 2 Jedi is never explained. It should have been a ton of Jedi there. Like, why is it this thing? The Empire was such a great job of setting up those stakes. So I do agree with Ben. Like, we have to do everything we can to keep that up there. On that note, let's talk about the Death Star.
I don't want another Death Star. I think that was a poor choice. I think that I like the idea of Palpatine being there and laying the trap,
right? And
them knowing that Palpatine is there. But you could have easily have done that just having a base there that's protected with a fleet of ships. And so my idea would have been to just have it discovered that this is where Palpatine's at. We have one chance to kill him. The rebellion is on its last legs after the beatings that it took. From Empire Strikes Back in the years after that leading into Jedi. And so it's sort of a last-ditch effort to stop the war and win the war is by taking out Palpatine on this base floating above a planet.
Yeah, what if it was a base that was creating those super Star Destroyers? Like Vader's, was it Executor?
Shipyards or
a shipyard like that. That was like, it'd be kind of the plot of KOTOR. Where if they had some sort of, like they had developed some sort of thing that would allow them to mass produce not just Star Destroyers, but super Star Destroyers, like truly terrifying weapons that were far more advanced than what the Rebels had been dealing with before.
Right.
So that would actually kind of work, and it would be very similar, because like the Death Star never actually has a super weapon. Like it has a cannon that blows up a ship, which is cool, but it's not a planet-destroying laser. So the actual firepower of it is actually kind of irrelevant. Like if they think it's an undefended, aside from the fleet that's around it and ship and force field, and then they realize like, oh no, those things are actually like gun turrets. Like they thought that was like the energy source, but they could actually shoot energy from it. Like that would have the same effect.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I never really put that much thought into necessarily the second Death Star. I've always kind of liked it for certain reasons. But I like your guys' ideas a lot, and I could definitely it doesn't take much convincing to move me to those ideas.
What did you like about the idea that there was a second Death Star?
The reasons the second Death Star does work for me is so there's a little bit of hope and confidence already within the rebellion that they've taken something down like this before and that they can do it again. And then the fact that
that's true, and that is one thing I do like about it being the Death Star, but I don't know if that's strong enough. But go on, yeah.
And then you have the idea of it partially constructed, so again, like that adds to that level of confidence that they can take this down. So then to find out that it is operational, and this trap is set, like it is a big moment that I really enjoy. So that's why the Death Star does work for me in that scenario. But I could easily see it changed out for anything that still lulls them into a sense of false security. That's the only, for me, that's the only role that the second Death Star feels. And of course, knowing the magnitude of what this weapon can do, it's sort of in a way, it's a cheap storytelling device that saves a lot of time from having to build up the threat of a new super weapon or technology. So it's really, and this is actually my big complaint about Return of the Jedi, is it feels like there's a lot of story crammed into one movie that needed to happen in like another 2 or 3 movies for me.
Well, I don't know if that part's true because, well, all right. My first line.
But
I
that'll
completely
take me down
agree.
another road,
I
so.
completely agree that the trap component, like the it's a trap part, is actually huge because up until that point, the Empire for the most part is brute force. Like they've had some cunning moments, like they follow the rebels back to Yavin 4, and like Vader is really
Vader,
good at Vader has unto himself, but for the most part, the Empire as a whole is perceived as like this like onslaught of power and strength, but not necessarily cunning. And the first time you actually deal with the Emperor, all of a sudden it's like, oh, he's way smarter than everyone. Like we haven't dealt with him before because you guys aren't that big of a threat yet, but now you've pissed him off, and he's brilliant. And like he'll lead you into a trap and just destroy you. Like that part is really cool, and that makes the Emperor so much more compelling as a villain than he would have been if he was just like Hitler being like, "I'm going to attack." Like
Right.
it wouldn't have worked.
I think that there's a way that they could have fixed a couple problems to get to that point. So I'm going to back up earlier in the movie. Han should have died in that.
Yeah.
I would have killed Han on Tatooine.
And I actually totally agree with you on that. I would have also made that first half. One of the problems I have with this movie. Sorry, and I'll turn it back over to you. I'm sorry, but you have like there's this one half of the movie that's Tatooine and Jabba, and then the other half. It's very clunky in its structure.
Yeah, that's actually what I was going to say when you were like, too much is crammed in. I'm like, well, but really, there's only 2 things that happen.
2 stories, yeah.
And the first one is sort of like a little bit of a, hey, the gang's all getting back together, let's go save the day, which sort of makes the second part better and worse at the same time.
So you can bridge those 2 with the death of Han.
Right.
If the Empire is involved and knows that there's going to be a rescue attempt on Han and tries to sabotage that rescue attempt in the process and sends, I don't know, Boba Fett along, and actually Han ends up dying at the hands of Boba Fett in order to save Luke or Leia. And in the process, they learn that the Emperor is at this one spot. You now have Leia, who's grief-stricken and revenge-motivated, to lead the rebellion into a foolhardy move to try to attack Palpatine, to enact revenge for the death of Han. Which I think now bridges those 2 events.
And adds a recklessness to it.
Yeah, and adds recklessness of a Skywalker into the story. And I think that makes sense. I don't know that I would have made her a Skywalker, but
And
that's actually a thing I have to say. Yeah. All right, let's talk about that one because
that was always clunky.
Yeah. Oh, I think it's
it was
horribly done.
completely retconned.
I think it is dumb. Like we have 33 years to get used to it. And we have all this expanded media, and then that all got wiped away, and then we have more expanded media working with that.
But that's the interesting thing. I remember I read something that sort of, well, there were supposed to be 3 more movies after this, and they were playing with the imagery of Luke going to the dark side, but never really moved him there.
Yeah, there's a bunch of that at the beginning, but
yeah, and that was always a problem. And then Leia is like, it felt like, well, that we teased that there's another Skywalker, so we want to wrap this thing up, guys.
No, but they didn't. That was added.
There's another.
But they didn't say Skywalker.
Well, right, but that's true. That's true. But what I was,
wasn't that something that they didn't put in the original cut?
No,
I thought that was added for special edition.
No,
not saying it. I'm not saying that it was a CGI thing, but I thought that was not in the cut. The same way that like the scene with Jabba in the first one was shot, they just didn't use him, and then they CGI'd in.
Is that so? Gary Kurtz, who had produced it with Lucas, the original 3 with Lucas, and said there was sort of a split with the cast and crew, and so while there were supposed to be 3 more movies after it, what happened is because of the divorce with George and Marsha Lucas, that they stopped
It just died in its.
Yeah, so
Yeah, like,
they decided to rush the ending of this story and kind of compact it because Boba was
supposed to be the
more
bad guy of the
formidable.
later stuff, yeah.
Right,
Like,
and Luke potentially would have killed Vader there and fallen to the dark side, and then this other Skywalker would come, and
be
it would
there
be a
to
totally
redeem
new character.
or just other person.
Right. Well, it was sort of hinted at another Skywalker still.
But it wasn't intended to be Leia.
Right.
Yeah, I guess. All right, so let's talk about the Leia thing. I don't think it does anything for the movie Return of the Jedi.
Right. No.
Like whether it does anything for later stuff is a totally unrelated point. Like that, I think it was just poorly handled and doesn't do anything. So why even have it? Like, I think the biggest thing it does is it actually makes the relationship with Han weaker. Because all of a sudden it's like, oh well, she really loves Luke, but they're related, so I guess she's with Han. Like, I mean, it's the idea is to set it up that
do we not do incest in space? Is that a thing?
it is actually a very Lensman thing.
Yeah.
If they wanted to tie it in with that bit of sci-fi universe stuff, but I think
Works in Game of Thrones.
No, it doesn't work. It's wrong, even there.
every Targaryen is either brilliant or mad or both.
Could work for Skywalkers.
All right, so I think we just agree, like, just ditch Leia as it.
She doesn't need to be a Skywalker.
I mean, there could be a hint of just someone else just being out there with some Force stuff, and that could have been just introduced in there.
Yeah.
It could have been Chewbacca.
It could have been anybody. Chewbacca as a Jedi would be pretty bad.
I'm just
Lobaka.
excited about that. As long as it's not lumpy. There is another. It's lumpy.
Oh god! You know what? Never mind. There's not.
Yeah, it just awkwardly forces the canonicity of the Christmas special.
Oh, you bastards! Just to sell lumpy toys.
We have saved
Actually,
Return of the Jedi.
I just-
Unfortunately, we've destroyed the franchise.
Actually, that's something I need to ask you. What would be worse, Ewoks or making the holiday special canon?
Oh, the holiday special.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're all agreed there.
Yeah. That's
So
just
here's a
awful.
thought about you brought up.
Think about it though.
Yeah, I know.
You brought up like Luke kind of looking like he's going towards the dark side at the
Yes.
beginning, which those first couple scenes have that in there. And I was thinking about this one. So Luke, I don't feel is suffering the type of PTSD that he should be from the fallout of Empire. I think that maybe that is the thing, the through line that should carry him into this battle, which we don't get. I think he shouldn't have a lightsaber at first. They kind of tease us with that, but then that moment when R2 pops open and shoots the lightsaber out, and it's a really triumphant moment. Like the audience all gets like really excited, and it's like
pretty awesome.
Luke's got a lightsaber again. He can now do anything, and like
it's now green.
he can win any fight, and that's so cool. But you know what? That felt just like it felt like that moment in Phantom Menace when they're like. This droid's call sign is R2-D2, Your Majesty, and the audience went nuts because it's like it's R2-D2 for real. Yes, we know it. Like it's that fan servicey kind of like it's a cool moment, but when you think about it, it doesn't really drive the story forward. Like I know they shot some stuff that they cut of Luke like building his lightsaber. I think I would have rather him still be working on it earlier in the movie and feeling kind of broken. Like he lost his hand. He's lost other things at this point, but like he lost his hand. All of his like ambitions seem to be tainted, and now he knows his father was Darth Vader. Like he should be much more scarred at the beginning, and he might be trying to fake it. He might be trying to pretend to be a hero, but we don't actually really get those scenes. Like we get a few scenes where he's like doing dark side things, but it's not what a broken person does.
And
It's
even
not.
then, it isn't really that dark either. Like you can
No, it's a
justify
choke.
it.
It's like it's not enough of the teasing of the dark side, and it doesn't carry him.
Or the temptation of
Yeah,
the
you
dark
never
side.
feel like he's going to lose it and go over.
Yeah.
Like it should have been a stronger like him feeling betrayed by Obi-Wan and Yoda when he actually goes and sees them again. And it should have been that he's in the earlier parts he's a little more desperate, and maybe he goes a little bit darker. Like maybe he doesn't act fast enough to save Han because of some point of jealousy over Leia or something like that.
Or
like,
he's busy killing somebody.
yeah, exactly. Where he's distracted and he kills, he actually kills like Boba Fett in a real fight,
Right.
or something like that. Like those are all things that could have been done to sort of strengthen the character of Luke. Another thing in that early period, because that opening story has nothing to do with the second part besides getting Han back, is maybe Jabba is doing stuff for the Emperor. Like they're actually finding out information about, like, what if Han dies so that they can get the information that they need to do whatever this big problem is, thus setting up something that isn't the Death Star or another Death Star, but setting up something, the base or whatever you want it to be. You can introduce it earlier on and just explain, oh my God, with those ships, they could, no one can oppose them, or they'll be able to create force fields that can block out all international or all interspace travel, and so every world will be cut off unless they allow people to go in and out. Set up whatever threat to clinch
some sort of MacGuffin.
Yeah, whatever the MacGuffin is, but set that up earlier in the movie. Have Jabba be tied to it because he's an international crime boss. He might be smuggling materials in or out, or providing the right connections, or he's a trap too. I mean, that might be a little too early to introduce it, the idea that the Empire is actively after them, but have Jabba matter to the next
completely.
part.
Yeah, right. Jabba should be tied to the Empire, and that's what I was saying. Having the Empire there with Jabba, knowing that there's going to be a Han rescue attempt,
right,
makes a hell of a lot of sense. They know how important Han is to these people.
And they have the connection with them. We've already established,
And they just all right, whatever, Jabba has Han, and he's frozen, so I guess nobody will ever come and get him. That doesn't make a lot of sense from the Empire
at
standpoint.
that point, the Empire is too cocky.
Yeah, they should have laid a trap. That should have been an Empire trap.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's such an obvious point.
Yeah. I love the idea of Luke being tempted and struggling with the dark side.
Yeah.
I even would like a fall of Luke in this movie.
Even if and it doesn't have to be necessarily it could be he defeats Vader and he takes, maybe even he strikes down the Emperor and he strikes down Vader and in the process falls. I felt like that was I have my theory is that's what they would have done if they did intend to do more movies. Yeah, that you do have this moment, or maybe he doesn't take down Vader, he takes down the Emperor, and he and Vader join forces, that he accepts him as his father, but you see the two of them continue.
And sort of this foolish belief of I'm going to hold on to good to upset his evil and create balance in the Force.
Because there are attachments.
I mean, we do
Luke.
have to embrace the fact that this was thought to be the last movie when they were making it. We're not talking about the longer. Yeah, this is not the modern world where everyone thought we'll just do a series that goes forever.
Right afterwards, they were talking about doing 7, 8, 9. I remember as a kid thinking there was going to be.
Well, they were leaking a lot of this information, but they wanted to do a wrap up movie. You can't argue that Return of the Jedi is done as a wrap up movie. The fact that they might have been we could then start a new sequel that carries a different story arc.
I think you could. I think you still can have him. Let's say he slays the Emperor, and he and Vader continue on, or are both alive at the end of it. Do you think that's not a satisfying ending to that movie?
Or slaying Vader and takes up the
only reason I like the idea of him taking down the Emperor is that you're defeating the Empire, and you're hoping that you're bringing good out of Vader, and there's hope that Vader, there's enough good in Vader, and him with Luke together can make a change in the galaxy. That's the only reason
Here's my question.
I would go for that.
Do you think a continuing story feels like the best choice for the franchise? Right now, or not right now, I should say. 15 years ago,
probably not.
Yeah, at the time, the idea of a trilogy that wrapped it up and here's the big win.
Yeah,
felt very satisfying. We got to see this whole
and you already had the sort of dark ending.
Yeah, exactly. We're thinking in a model of doing sequels, but in the 80s, only a few series were really starting to push into that sequel territory, and even then, a lot of those were after. Jedi came out. Mm-hmm. Prior to that, sequels weren't as big of a thing.
Right.
So doing a series like this would have been kind of just unheard of. So it wasn't even in the mindset.
Yeah, but why not?
And the only reason why I side with that is because Lucas had talked about doing those movies
doing a 9-part trilogy, 9-part series. And look, I mean, let's be honest. I mean, these had become a huge money grab. So the idea of being able to do another 3 movies and do more merchandising,
that's true,
is a huge win. For
them. Let's go back to your point, Case, of wrapping up the story for a satisfying.
Yeah, if we wanted to do the satisfying story, we have the broken, tempted warrior who we saw his big damn hero moment in the first one. We see him thinking that he's getting his shit together and being even better, and finding out that a lot of it was a lie in the second one. This one should be him coming to terms with what that means to him and what his actual code is, and finding the unified view. Him which is what they do. He like says he's a Jedi, and he declares it, and he resists the dark side. Like that moment, I think, is strong. I think it's just not earned in the movie itself. Like most of the payoff comes from the movie before.
I think having Vader survive the movie, even if he's maybe injured, I think can still work for a satisfying ending. So let's say that's still the last movie.
Let me have a rebuttal on that one.
Sure.
Because I think the fact that Vader dies does tie together that hero's journey really well for him, because he opens his quest to be a Jedi because he wants to be a Jedi like his father before him, and him finally meeting his father, realizing that he has fallen, like that whole arc, like him burning his father and seeing his Force ghost at the end, does have that like payoff of being like, I am a Jedi, and I've actually victory. Like I'm not only being like him, I'm continuing the good in him and like redeeming him, or like his own legacy, and continuing it even better.
But my suggestion is Vader still surviving and helping Luke take down the Emperor.
Did you see the Star Wars Infinity with the white Vader after he like turns to the light side and rejoins his kids?
Well, see, I'm thinking more like a Vader at that point. Let's say you do continue that story. At that point, Vader's going to have to go on trial for war crimes. I mean, he did kill. Oh, I think
I think really for this story, Vader's got to die.
Yeah.
But if the Emperor has to die, or just be, but then you're just doing Star Wars again. Like if the Emperor gets away, I think the big win is important to the finale of the series.
Let me throw another idea out for you. It ends kind of in the way that we're familiar with, and with Luke's defeating both Vader and the Emperor, but in true hero's journey and sort of the idea of this being a space western or a samurai film. Oftentimes in those films, the hero is then sort of like
he has no place in
society. And he's just sort of like he just kind of wanders off, sort of disenchanted with the whole thing, and everybody's left wanting him to stay and be part of it, but he's just unable to do so.
Right.
And we're left kind of seeing Luke head out into space to kind of figure out what he's going to do to reestablish the Jedi Order.
What if he just stayed on Endor and started teaching the Ewoks?
That's an awful idea.
No, I like that. Ewok school with Luke. Because then what would happen is then when the Jedi school gets defeated, you get all of your slain Ewoks.
Well,
you haven't thought about this.
That's true. I would need that actually and I would need that scene in order to.
Kylo Ren kills all the Ewoks.
Oh, it'd be the best.
You'd be the biggest
ever.
Kylo Ren fan ever.
I already am with the thought of it.
Like I don't know if I want to talk about it being like just like Lord of the Rings, like where like Frodo isn't fit to live amongst his people anymore. Like he's seen too much. And he has to go off into another world. But he could be a man outside of his world. He doesn't have to just physically leave it. Like maybe.
But how do you?
I don't know. It's hard to do in one movie.
Yeah. How do you tell that exactly? How do you tell that story in a scene or two of like, well, Luke's just awkward now. I like the idea of him.
Here's the thought: what if everyone thought he was dead? What if everyone thinks he was dead, but he landed on Endor and he's living as a hermit, just like old Ben?
The problem is the title of the movie, Return of the Jedi, insinuates some sort of establishment of the Jedi Order again, and that's not really dealt with either in the way we know the movie.
Now, what if it is Revenge of the Jedi?
If it's Revenge of the Jedi,
what if it's Revenge of the Jedi and the movie ends?
Revenge of the Jedi also needs a darker ending.
Well,
if it's a lot darker.
No, well, here's my thought. What if the movie ends, the rebels go off thinking they've won, but they think that Luke died when whatever this thing is destroyed, and Luke actually made it off with his dying father, and he stays with his father as he dies. Not then is just like left to sit there and watch, and he's like the last shot is him watching as the ships are leaving, and then like you see their like hyper trails going off in space, and he turns around and like just like walks off into the wood, and then that's the credits.
Yeah, that's a very ominous ending, and I like it.
Yeah, and it's a similar idea of him just not being able to.
Because he could come back on the dark side because he felt abandoned, or he could have just like gone off to be at peace now that the Jedi Order has had its revenge on the Sith for destroying them.
Yeah.
Well, let me stop. Hold on. Not the Sith, because at this point, the only thing that's referred to the Sith has been the Star Wars novelization, which is no one knows anything about in the real world at this point in time.
Right.
But the dark side, like
dark side, yeah.
like the Jedi were destroyed. The last ember of the Jedi come back and destroy the things that destroyed them and made the world okay for people, just ordinary people, not Force users, to go and find their balance.
Yeah, because there's no idea truly of the bringing balance to the Force at this point either, since that's a prequel idea,
Right? Yeah.
with the Chosen One prophecy. Yeah, I guess I just wish there was more play with Luke being broken and having a chance to legitimately be tempted by the dark side.
What if at the end Luke had another body part missing?
I don't think that's necessary for it. I think seeing I wanted more a chance. The reason why I like the idea of shortening the top end of it, with Jabba and the rescue of Han and all, is because I want to spend more time with Luke and Vader. And the idea that Luke may even seriously consider, joining up with Vader and see that as, this is my only option. Like, especially if he sees what the Emperor is able to do. Like, if the Emperor starts taking out even more ships and he's like, you know what, Vader, I will join you, and we've got to take this monster down. I think the chance for more of that play in those scenes, or even in the lead up to the throne room scene, is something that will help legitimize the actual temptation of the dark side. Because you kind of get it in just like a couple moments of rage from Mark Hamill, and not really.
Yeah, it always feels like Vader is more tempted by Luke than Luke is tempted by Vader.
Right. And I do think that Vader's turn is very well done without the nose. Even with the nose, it's not that bad in the later dubs of it. I think the Vader watching Luke being tortured is a very good scene. I don't want to get rid of that. Like there's so many good this is the thing. It's it's a movie that's so good but isn't quite great that this is why it's like interesting to talk about how do you push that a little bit further, because that's a problem that a lot of movies have, and this is a great example and has the best pedigree going into it.
Right.
Like you think about all the other like the great details going like backing it. Like it had the huge fanfare, it had the amazing special effects. Like the special effects in Jedi are bar none the best of any Star Wars movie yet. Like in terms of like the space fights and everything, like it looks so much better than the CGI. And like J.J. Abrams did a really good job with his, but like, there's still just moments.
That Star battle.
The Star battle over the Death Star is so good.
Yeah,
like the geometry, like the physics of everything moving. Sure, it's not quite how space works, but like it still looks so good, and the ships look so good, and all those details. There's never these like puppety kind of moments in that. Like unlike Empire, where like the the asteroid field and the ships never
you
quite
do have
feel
like
right.
the space worm.
Exactly. Like
Some guy's hand in a sock.
Right.
Like Jedi is really where they're firing on all cylinders for the things that people were really counting on. So the fact that the movie hits a lot of the notes right, but not in a satisfying sequence, is the thing that bugs me about it. Like,
but that happens a lot. Like I see that happen a lot with special effects movies, where they put so much attention and so much detail and effort into the special effects that they forget about the script. That happened. Like, well, Michael Bay is like the king of that, where he doesn't even care about plot, or plot's irrelevant. It's all about the special effects and how does it look. There seems to be like this weird balance in making big budget movies like this, where it's really difficult for directors and studios to produce a movie that is visually stunning and still able to hold itself together with a decent plot and storyline that makes any sense. And I don't know why you have to choose, but it seems like 90% of the time there's like some weird choices involved, and like, well, we really want to do this really cool special effect, and so let's just do whatever we got to do to get to that.
I think that's more true recently. I mean, I guess I don't have that many things to compare it with, in the late 70s, early 80s. But I think that's definitely true now when you have the pressure of like, all right, well, there's not a lot of instances where people are willing to push back the release date of a movie now, and because they got to churn it out, and because the emphasis is on the big action, that often happens. But before, it was like what? It was like 3 years between every Star Wars movie. So I don't.
But there was a lot of financial pressure on Lucas to make this film. He was going broke. financially, and so there was a lot, and because he had invested most of his money into Empire to get the money, to make that movie himself, and it worked really well. But there was still a lot of financial pressure on him just to get Jedi made and as quickly as possible.
True.
And he had to get the divorce, and so there wasn't, there's all sorts of reasons why you can justify the few problems that this movie does have.
Yeah, I think it's more an issue of collaboration than necessarily because of a focus more on technology. Because the thing is, we did talk about yes, Empire's a little bit more hokey in some of those effects than before, but I think there is a very good balance of it. I look at the original, like the Lord of the Rings trilogy from Peter Jackson, and I still look at that, and I'm still as much as those effects now look dated, I still am amazed by the attention to the detail in those effects. Combining models, combining CGI, the way they layer the CGI, and I still feel it looks better, just in terms of the attempt of what they're doing and the balance of story and effects, that I still think it's better than a lot of the special effects movies that we get today.
I think what kind of sucks is that it sort of comes down to, if a movie is a fight to make, then there's actually a decent chance that everyone is working as hard as they can and getting the things that really matter to them through. I don't mean because there's a lot of times where you can talk about studio interference ruining a movie, pushing something too hard, or there's a lot of times where a director has too much power. I mean, that's the prequels right there.
Right.
If a movie is a struggle on everyone, but that they're pushing to do the best they can and what matters most to them, the original Star Wars is a great example. Lucas had to fight to get it, but he had this big vision, and that compromise and that collaboration really makes it work.
Same with Apocalypse Now.
Yeah, we're talking about movies that are very difficult to make, and movies are just hard to make, and having it feel like a team effort where maybe no one's happy the time they're making it, but eventually they produce a great work. That's where you have these really solid things versus ones where it's well, I really want to showcase this idea, or I really want to showcase this technology, or I really want to talk about the time that woman cheated on me and she's a bitch. Those are the types of movies that fall apart. They might have one glorious thing pushing them forward, but ultimately there's something missing there, and that I think that's the teamwork component of movie making. And I think Jedi is when Lucas starts having a little more control. He had the least to do with Empire, and Empire is great, but he had a huge part of it. And like we all know, Star Wars was a fight from start to finish.
Right.
But Jedi is where it starts to get easier, and then later movies it's too easy.
Damn
right.
mess, yeah.
Right.
Yep. I think that there's not a lot to fix in this movie, which is great because it like you said, it's a good movie. There's not a lot to fix in it, but it's not a great movie. I love the ideas that we came up with. I hope I live long enough to see them reboot the Star Wars.
Do you think
universe.
reboot would happen with this series? That almost sounds sacrilegious to reboot the original Star Wars.
I don't know if it could be rebooted.
You got to wait till Lucas is dead.
I mean, I'm going to say that I don't know if it could be rebooted. Then, people are going to be oh, well, but there's so many examples of things that were rebooted that seem to be reboot proof, like Star Trek. Star Trek.
Right.
It was just we're just going to move on to the next ship and the next crew. How about we just go back in time? Let's just go back in time.
We're just going to redo it all, baby.
Might be it. They might do a soft reboot.
Yeah.
You could, and there's stuff out there. Star Wars does not have the type of time traveling stuff already built into it that Star Trek does. But it could happen. You could have you could have waves of the Force reshape how things move, and then
or just
you tell
run
a
into
story.
a different alien race that has this technology that allows that to occur.
I like the Force idea better.
but what I mean is that Star Trek, since the first season, has had time travel in play.
Right.
Part of that was budget because they kept on having issues, and they'd shoot on the Green Acres set and other locations that were other CBS products, and that was just a fact of life. But that meant they had time travel from the get-go. So they've been doing time travel. They had it in the original movies. They had it in Next Gen. They had it in the Next Gen movies. They've had it in Voyager. They had it in Deep Space Nine. Every single series of Star Trek has had time travel in play. In fact, one of the series, Enterprise, is entirely about time travel. So, like, it's a series that when they did a time travel story to, like, reboot it, it didn't feel alien to the world because literally it was, like, so ingrained in the world that time travel was a thing that nothing was
total
betrayed.
sense, yeah.
Star Wars, as far as I know, has never done, like, a real time travel story. Like, there have been stories in the expanded universe of things, I think. I can't even think of one
I
off the
don't
top of my
know
head.
enough.
There's been a lot of, like, flashbacks and stuff, but I can't think of a true
can't
time
think of
travel
it,
story.
yeah.
But I like the idea of like
Using the Force.
something such a critical moment happening
That
at some point
ripples
in the
through the
future.
Force.
Right.
Yeah,
it ripples through
yeah.
and
The
changes.
Force and the Force being able to see before and after, and maybe the Jedi's of yesteryear see something really big. Like, it doesn't have to be something that intentionally changes time, but the Jedi's of before feel the future in such its enormity that all of a sudden things start to shift and then something changes. That would be a way to reboot it that doesn't feel alien to the world that they've presented.
Or you could just reboot it.
Right.
Yeah, or you could just do a prequel and run the prequel into the timeline of the original movies.
That's true.
You could fix the prequels, run it right in.
You could talk to us. We can fix the prequels.
Yeah, we got episodes on it
God.
already, guys.
Okay, so anyway, here's my takeaway for when we're talking about Jedi. We think that Luke should have had a little bit more of an arc dealing with his pain and turmoil and dark side calling, whether that's him actually falling or just being more like a PTSD soldier. Right. Like, we could kind of play around with that. We feel that Jabba should have been more tied in to things that happened later in the movie. Like, that first story arc is completely unrelated to the rest, whereas the original Star Wars has no, like, chaff. Like, everything is, like, super important to the plot of the movie. In Empire, everything sort of builds around it, but it's all part of, like, setting up the stakes for the end of the movie. Whereas, like, the opening of Jedi does not set up the stakes for the rest of the movie. We think that Han dying is an idea that could work. I don't think you have to kill him, but I think that his presence there really doesn't help or hurt the movie. That Leia being Luke's sister is dumb. And that it being the Death Star, probably a little weak. You could have done something else, and you could have made the Ewoks count a little bit more and be a little less laughable. And then if you wanted to have the big ending and wrap up the series, that's cool. Or if you wanted to set up sequels, you had plenty of material to work with.
Right.
If we were in 1983 and we wanted to make a fourth Star Wars movie, there was a lot we could have done. But if we wanted this to be the swan song of the series, there's also a lot you could do there. So I feel like we have a really good idea for how Jedi could be slightly tweaked, but like we said, it's a good movie. Well, thanks, guys. Let's wrap this up. Tune in next time. We're going to be talking about Highlander 2: The Quickening. And thanks, guys, for checking out our pilot episode.
Bye.
Until next time, stay scruffy, my nerf herders.
Well done.
Thanks for listening to Certain Point of View's Another Pass podcast. Don't miss an episode. Just subscribe and review the show on iTunes. Just go to certainpov.com.